architectural design titled Crossroads of ConveRVsations 2020. The webinars will enable the exchange of ideas and work experience from other allied fields between domain experts and alumni of RVCA who are currently spread across the globe. The underlying theme this year for the series of talks is facets, architecture and allied disciplines. The intent to view and integrate different perspectives as multiple facets of the architecture and design thinking. From politics of development at the urban scale to various forms of art and design, an explorative journey of how and where other disciplines intersect and connect with architecture and architects. So today we are here to be a part of the third talk of the series titled Space and Power, Feminist Perspectives.
Good evening everyone, I'm Sadvitri Shetty from third year. Surbhi and I will be introducing our speakers for the day. Now, I would like to introduce our first speaker, RAJSHREE Raj Mohan ma'am. She's graduated in architecture from CEPT University, Ahmedabad in 1995 and is presently practicing as a senior architect at Chandra Mohan Associates.
I think she got disconnected. So she's
can you continue? Can you continue?
Yes, so she's presently practicing as a senior architect at Chandra Mohan Associates, Trivandrum, Kerala since 2008. Also an adjunct faculty at Avani Institute of Design, Calicut, and Marian College of Architecture and Planning in Trivandrum. She also conducted Vayana Shala, an architectural reading forum for IIA in Trivandrum for 2 years, documented oral histories of public spaces in Trivandrum in 2016. And in 2018, she conceptualized and produced a short film, Kathakali Vedu, as a part of a larger project for the documentation of marginalized craft narratives. She also presented a paper, The Greater Divide, Spatial Narratives from the Margins in April 2020 for Symposium on Gender and Architecture Leadership in India, convened by Professor Madhavi Desai, Dr. Anuradha Chatterjee, and Dr. Kush Patel. Currently, she's engaged in research on spatial history of talkies in Thiruvananthapuram from 1915 to 1985. And her personal interests lie in research on settlement patterns, interstitial spaces within an urban fabric, and gender studies. Good evening, ma'am. It's great to have you here with us today.
Thank you, Surbhi. Shelby, thank you so much. And before I start the presentation, I'm so sorry about those Trivandrum and all these names, which are so complicated to actually say. Thank you also, Sadhiti. And before I start, I would also like to thank Professor Salila Vanka, the RVCA academic team. This is the first time I am working or presenting with all of you. And also my co-panelists, they are esteemed urbanists, Ananya Ramesh and AAKARSH SHAMANUR, with whom I will be having a nice discussion. I'm looking forward for a feminist discussion with all of you all. So today what I plan, I'll just share my screen. One sec. Okay. There it goes. Is it visible?
Yeah, it is, Rajeshri.
Ah. So, okay. So what we are, first of all, space and power, when I actually heard the topic itself is a very vast and it has so many different ways in which you could actually address that entire, the subject. And what we are looking today is, I hope with all my co-panelists also, are feminist perspectives of how we look at space, how we assimilate it, and how we come up with designs. And in a nutshell, it's also basically looking at to how we live and what are the ideas that we are actually reinforcing by the spaces that we live in and design with. So this presentation proposes a reading as an analysis through a feminist lens of our spatial constructs and its spatial implications. And I'm drawing from my undergraduate research paper, which was done on the interrelationship of social organizations and space in traditional settlements. And traditional settlements here, I was looking into Badni settlements in Kutch, the Nayart house in Kerala, and the Khasi household in Meghalaya. And through which I want to actually, this is now I realize it's almost 25 years back that I had done this work. And today I seek to explore the dialogues and iterations which I can draw from this and which are needed for a feminist cityscape. Now, there are several things that I still hold on to, which I had written in 25 years back. And one is a quote that is, the city is an organized memory. And in history, women are the forgotten. This particular Hannah Arendt's quote is very important to me even today, primarily because when I listen to stories of women and the innumerable amount of work and research work men and women are doing to to highlight all those invisible stories, folklore, songs, narratives which are like totally sidelined, which I've never come across, writings, and these are the things that I've been flooded with over the years. I really, I really feel that it's very essential that we realize that there's a certain part of our memory which we have completely negated. And in history, they were never featured they were never considered important enough to be looked into, or even their voices to be heard. What is another important aspect also is that now when we look at women, and if we see that the women's stories and their experiences and narratives are neglected, I shudder to think what people who are queer, transgender, who also form a sizable number of people within our population would be experiencing. So I'll just move further. One sec, it's kind of stuck. One second, I'll just, I think it's stuck, okay. And this is another image. This is from Rityan Mukherjee's travelogue, and he had published a small travelogue in an online archives called Pari, that is People's Archive for Rural India. And this is an image from his travelogue when he was going, the name of the article is moving or traveling in a very, very slow train to Gwalior. And this is one shot that kind of, for me, it encapsulates everything that we see in our society today, the way we experience it also. And I'm very grateful for Rityan for letting me use this image for our work, for our talk today. And what really happens, what I like this image primarily is because the women below have actually been conditioned to believe that the gentleman on the top, who is their blood relative, is entitled to have more legroom, more space, and freedom to stretch himself, and they're in agreement with it, and they don't see that they don't see it as it is wrong. And the person above also sees the women below as
RAJSHREE ma'am, I'm sorry to interrupt, but can you be a bit more louder?
Yes, I'll try. I'll try. Is it better now?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's better now, I think.
Better
if
now?
You could just,
okay.
Hold the mic a bit. Yeah. I think that's...
Yeah, I'll just hold it quite closer.
Sorry.
And
sorry
absolutely no problem. Please. No, all of you all are free to interrupt me as much as you want. It doesn't bother me at all. So I like it that way. So in this particular image I feel the men feel entitled to kind of have that they have a privileged position. They have experienced it through their entire lifetime, and they see themselves as capable of stretching themselves or taking an extra space or a vantage point, primarily because they feel they are entitled to it. They don't see that themselves doing something very wrong. And this is something I learned with my experiences in talking to men and women prisoners of domestic violence or sexual violence. The men don't think they are wrong at all, and the women at times, the society, including all the people who are outside, also actually believe that women are to be blamed for the particular predicament that they find themselves in. So this particular image puts that across very effectively. That's why I have shared it. I had actually begun my dissertation with Karl Marx's philosophical works, a quote from his, which talks about human nature and how the man and woman relationship, the, the refinement of that relationship and the equality that one sees that exists between each other actually is what can be termed as human nature. And that is what qualifies a person as being human or not human or inhuman. So this is a quote from his. I'm not going to read that out. And along with this, I'm juxtaposing the crime rate against women, the map that I've downloaded from Wikipedia on violence against women. And I'm looking at spatial violence. And if you look at this entire chart, which is in violet, you realize that whenever I look at maps, I always look at the state at where I am. And right now I'm in Kerala, and I look at that map in Kerala, and I see that is still a dark shade of violet, which essentially means that the crime rate is very high. Of course, the crime rate could be high also because the amount of reporting that happens here is very high. But it makes me very sad, because despite the high amount of literacy, when I compare it to Rajasthan or compare it to Madhya Pradesh, I know that Kerala, the literacy rate is extremely high, and yet the violence is also, it seems to have made any difference in the extent of violence in this map that is seen here. That is one. And second, it's extremely saddening for me, and it's always very depressing when I see that I don't know when this map will be white, actually white, where there will not be a single shade of lavender, which is what I think all of us should be striving towards also. Is there a need, is this a kind of a normal that now I am comparing this state is worse than that state, but actually none of the states should have any kind of violence at all. So that, and this is a map of violence against women in India, and this is 2012. And I'm still looking for maps which talk about the crime rate against transgender, against queer, and the LGBTQ community. And I still don't have a comprehensive data, though I end up reading up enormous number of reports of the kind of violence that they are undergoing and the kind of systemic violence that they have to put up with. So, but still, at times I wonder, do we always have to live like this? And these are questions I've constantly asked myself. And who the hell are we designing for? And I'm looking, and this is Gail S. Rubin. I think Salila Vanka would be familiar with her, and so many others would also. And who defines, she's a cultural anthropologist, among other things, and she's in the University of Michigan. I think she still is there. I don't know, but I'm a huge fan of her writings. Defines gender as a socially imposed division of the sexes, a product of the social relations of sexuality. And what one sees is a set of arrangements. I mean, there's a certain kind of behavior we enforce based on the biological differences, and then we expect that to be reinforced over and over again until it becomes a norm. And so violence against women is essentially a norm now. It is not, we don't see it as an anomaly or something that has to be, that shouldn't be there. And had we actually had that as a mindset, we wouldn't have had that purple chart at all. And I look at the family why it is, and how do we understand the idea of family. And the family is understood as a basic unit of social structure. That's why I'm looking into it also. And today I think a whole lot of things have changed, primarily because the family which has been mentioned here, a common understanding of a family is a heterosexual couple, and a male and a female and two children, and preferably if it is Southeast Asia, then the children will be all men, all male. And the term family comes into existence from with the system of private property, and signified domestic slavery, and essentially meant famulus meant domestic slave, and familia is an aggregate number of slaves which belonged to one man. And I am also putting in an image. It's one of my old favorite images of Shiva and his family, and Shiva in his and Parvati, and that is Ganesh and Kartikeyan, and the Nandi and Tiger are their respective mounts on which they would travel. And this is a scene, a very peaceful scene, domestic scene, as they would call it. And these are the kind of imageries that have been prepared over and over again, which reinforce that this is the family structure, and this is the kind of imagery which is supposed to be looked forward to. So we don't make any allowances for uh, family structures which are of gay couples or lesbian couples or transgenders. They somehow don't figure in our popular imagination. And in my research, I'm just sharing a few slides, and please bear with me because these slides were made in, these images were made in 1995, 96. So the quality is bad. And I've just taken snapshots of it and put in here. And I was looking as to, did we always live like this? And even then I was looking into how did the social structure evolve to what we have right now. And we're looking into hunter-gatherer settlement. I have written the name of the references which you could follow up if you wanted to know more. And this is Mitasini Cree, which is in East Canada, and the Aikung San, Botswana. Kung San in Botswana was supposed to be a very egalitarian community. Why egalitarian? Because though they have a private space they would retire into, essentially the main space was the hearth, that's the fireplace, and men and women would just sit around it. So there were no symbolic or binaries which were imposed based on their gender, is what the archaeologists and anthropologists say. And again, Mitasini Cree, again, it's a hunter-gatherer settlements, but here we see an enclosure where the enclosure is divided into two, where the fireplace becomes the center. And on either side is the men and the female spaces. But again, what is interesting here also is that you still don't have the binary kind of reinforced, like this is good, there's no hierarchy here, as this is good and this is bad, or this is dark and this is light. Both share the space equally. This is the Amarasi house, Indonesia, Timor. I'll be coming back to this later when I'll be looking into the other research plates. And what we see in here in this particular settlement, which is an agricultural kind of community, and here you have binaries really enforced. Binaries as with front, back, clean, dirty, day, night, public, private, male, female, sacred, profane, and the list goes on. And with binary, the issues with binary is that eventually they become hierarchical in nature and they become opposites. And that means one is always pitted as being better than the other. So that's one of the reasons why I took this Amrasi house in Indonesian Timor. And I see later on in my own case studies when I had looked into, where you see an elaboration of the simple idea of binary. Again, I look into another case where when I was looking in terms of hunter-gatherer communities, agriculturalists, and how gender notions have shifted, the idea of symbolism in these communities. And I looked into Taurik, and I was looking into how religion, where this is an Islamic faith is what the Tauriks follow, but yet they have a very different way of following Islam, also different in the sense as to what is commonly understood or defined as Islamic faith. here the women read and teach the Quran, and which is also seen in Malaysia and a lot of other Islamic countries. And here both men and women obviously wear the veil because of the heat, and that's more of a climatic response rather than privacy or a need to shield oneself from any other human being. And we have a simple the sketch. What I have done is of the Torah tent where I've showed is that a simple unified space which and which actually has, it's a common area for both of them to hang around. A lot of activities happen outside also, and you don't have a separate division in terms of this is a men's exclusive space or a women's exclusive space. There is a certain kind of relaxation in those kind of social norms. So at times I feel the way a certain faith is followed really varies, and that also has a direct reflection on the way people stay. I have only taken select examples here because I have half an hour to kind of let go. And I move on to looking at first, when I look at gender and certain symbolic associations, I later on moved to looking at gender and the body and the kind of associations people made. And I've looked into the Oikema, the House of Pleasure, at Claude Nicolas Ledoc's work, a French architect, very utopian ideas. And he came up with the idea that within the city plan, the brothel should play a very integral role, and essentially it is a place for pleasure for men. And so hence he decided that obviously the plan should follow the sexual anatomy of a male, and so he completely designed, thankfully or not, it was never really built. But the whole idea itself I found it extremely radical, that if he really wanted to have the brothel as a center place, one objection or one kind of what upset me more is he actually looks at it completely, where his writings look at the space essentially for pleasure for men only. The city would be for men. So this is something that keeps on getting reinforced from the Roman cities onwards, where city spaces are also seen essentially as a able-bodied male space and not for anybody else. So hence the brothel would be, in his scheme of things, would be the center space here, and it would also be shaped here to make a very direct reference that this is a place for pleasure for men alone. I've not shared images, but also when you look at Roman cities and their city plans, the archaeological kind of surveys that I've seen, that they have identified baths and thermes for men and women, which are inside the society, inside the city layout, but on the periphery, along the borders, the fortification, you have a lot of these brothels, which are places for pleasure for men who are traveling and coming in and or leaving out of the city. So I don't know from where he borrowed that idea, but this was quite a revelation for me at that time. And then I look into the megalithic. There were also a lot of writings on the body and gender and the certain kind of forms that people the womb as a receptacle, and there's a whole lot of literature that I managed to read at that time. And I looked at the megalithic temples of Malta. This is in 3600 BC to 2500 BC, and these were times where again it is the archaeologists and anthropologists say that this was a egalitarian community. There were priestesses who were in control of the religion, and these were the temples built, and they were elliptical in shape and hence kind of classified as, maybe I don't know if they really can kind of make that connection, but I think it is because of the bones that they found in these places. But these kind of forms that were given in egalitarian communities of rounded elliptical forms, not a very rigid axis, but there are subsidiary axes which are also which kind of also play a very important role. And these were kind of associated with something called gynecomorphic forms, and there was a whole lot of literature on this also. But when I looked at that, I actually looked into also, it would always remind me of the plan of Villa Schwab. That is why I have put Le Corbusier's work here. And this particular plan, I invariably, whenever I look at that image of the plans of the megalithic ruins in Malta, it reminds me of this primarily because of the form that it taken. And it is also a reminder that Le Corbusier was a modernist architect, and the form itself is such a sculptural work. Most of his art, I'm not looking at various other aspects, but I'm looking all his work, essentially the whole body of work essentially were sculptural in nature. There was no restriction in terms of the fluidity of the forms that he had worked with. And would I be able to classify them in terms of feminine or masculine kind of form? I don't really think so. So that was another small argument that I put up in my research paper.
Rajashree, again,
Moving
sorry to interrupt. Could you speak up a
Sorry.
little into the mic, please?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you.
So sorry.
No worries.
And another was another other than symbolism and the idea of the body, gender and body, and I looked into gender association with form and ornamentation, and how this is the Doric and the Ionic column, and how the Doric column, because it's plain and simple, and then the Ionic column is far more fluted, and at the more the ornamentation and the detailing that is added onto it, it becomes more feminine. And this kind of association also, I found it particularly very disturbing as to whether one could actually differentiate that way, and was it right to actually put club ornamentation with femininity. So I was looking, I had in my paper research, I had kind of looked at the Prudential building, and this is Louis Sullivan's work, and I found his work very interesting. And this particular project also, I don't really look into the form and making of it, but I look at the envelope that he has prepared. And in this envelope, it's very modernist building, perhaps from the inside, but from the outside, he covers it up with a filigree work, elaborate filigree work. This is just one of his projects. So all his projects have this particular feature, very meticulously done cast iron filigree work, which kind of makes the building really stand out. And he also, what disturbed me was that also he faced a lot of flack for this, because all through his work, you see a far more, every project as you go one after the other, you see a more refined kind of ornamental work. He never really gives up on it, but it just becomes more and more ornamental as his career span goes. And he did receive a lot of he was labeled as feminine, and he was looked down upon by many of the other modernist architects of that time, which was, I thought, was rather unfortunate. Then I look at Adolf Loos. When we talk of ornament, it's not possible to not mention Adolf Loos. His Villa Muller, and where he used to condemn very openly the idea of the ornament, and he argues that women have to dress and ornament themselves to appeal to man's sickly sensuality, and they have to wear impractical things such as long skirts and stress their decorative role. And and he kind of prefers that they would all wear a simple English suit, which I also feel, I think it is also very elaborate. But anyway, he talks about ornament. He famously also said that it's linked to degeneracy and crime, and that it should be removed from objects of daily use, not just clothes, but also furniture and buildings. Now, this is this kind of visual clean box effect that you see here in Villa Muller this is the 1930s, and 1930s this would seem very uh, very what would you call it? It would be commonplace today. A lot of buildings you see of a similar type here now, but in 1930, this would have stood out compared to all the ornate kind of buildings that were happening around, traditional houses that were done. And this was a white facade, clean surfaces, devoid of any kind of ornamentation or decoration on the outside, and no elaborate articulation of surfaces either. And it's interesting that this was the 1930s, and I think around 1931 or so, 31 or 32, I don't remember too well, but it's around the same time when he wrote Ornament and Crime, and where he completely kind of comes up with this essay which he talks about. He completely denounces the idea of using ornament. He completely removes it, that it should be totally avoided, and no
good architect or a reasonable, rational architect should actually fall into that particular trap. And talking about dresses, it's amazing. It's like I always wonder. This is 1930s, right? When he's kind of talking about the ornament and dress and how men and women should dress up and how women should dress and how it affects the men. And this is now 2020. We are still fighting for the right to dress the way we want to. I mean, this is a point I kind of thought of when I was putting this together. Nothing much has changed. And Beatrice Colomina's work was a huge influence for me in 95, 96. She had come up with this book, Sexuality and Space, which completely blew me off at that time. And she talks about extensively about Adolf Loos' work also. And she discusses this particular Muller house in detail. And the exterior is masculine, while the interior is the scene of sexuality and reproduction. Why she makes a statement is that the exterior of the Muller house, like you see, is very plain and white and clean. But in the inside, what you have is a lot of tapestry, ornament, and the fur, soft clothing, and even where she talks about it, even the carpet actually climbs up onto the bed, and this is how he turns the interior of their bedrooms around. It goes a lot to say about how people looked at interiors or the internal interior of a domestic space and how people kind of looked at outside. I would also think in terms when right now in the nationalist movement when we had this is precisely the same attitude the nationalist leaders also had during our independence struggle, where they looked at the Western uh, English education system as rational and something which was to be followed in the public life, and in the civic sensibility should be structured along those lines. But in the traditional home, inside the home, they were all the nationalists would endorse a very traditional way of living. No matter how misogynist it would be, that's the kind of living they wanted. And they wanted women to actually be upholders of those traditional value systems, no matter how regressive they were. So moving on to my research paper, this was my dissertation. I looked into three. I looked into the reason why I looked into settlements also during my study. I was reading up SEPT archives, library had an entire collection. All the theses are collected. There were in 95, there was an immense number of research theses which were done on socials, on a settlement pattern. And you had settlement pattern of every possible area you could think of was there in our library. But what was common in all of them was that they would discuss material, they would discuss the climate, they would discuss the construction style and the technology used, the structure of the settlement, etc. But there were hardly anything on gender. There were no gender readings of those spaces. Or gendered understanding of how spaces worked, the kind of accessibility or gaze, nothing of these issues were ever discussed, nor was the economic structure would only be a mention, that okay, this is a so and so economy, or they were cattle rearers, or they were agriculturists, and that is it. How that impacted was not never discussed. So what I had done at that time was I selected three primary case studies, three primary theses I took up, is that they have already done as a primary material, and then worked on at the analysis part, and I went on to add on also gendered readings of all those three settlements. So that's what I had done at that time. So this, I was looking into Bunny settlements in Kutch, which are patriarchal and they are cattle rearers. And what I looked into two villages there. One is Dordo, that's a Muslim settlement, pastoralist, and this is in Bunny. And these were the drawings. This is from Apurva Amin's essay thesis. And I got the drawings, the base drawings from him. And these drawings, what I went on is to look as to how the movement pattern changes, and how it is, and how it is affected by gender, or if it is not. That's what I was proposing to do. So this is a typical Muslim, typical because they were very They followed Islam in a very rigid manner, which had a very segregated role for men and women. They had strict duties, and that is why I said it's a typical Muslim settlement. And these settlements actually had a very rigid code as to who could come in, who could go. Orientation was fixed based on who could access which areas. So this was the movement pattern of Dordo village. And very nearby, it was just a bus, an hour and a half in a bus trip. And then you go to Ludhia village, which is again a bunny. Both these villages have a similar construction because the same weather, same climate, same technology is used to build, but the entire settlement structure has changed. Here, I'm showing the movement path between through the settlements. And what I deduced from here is that the fact that they were uh, following two different ways of gendered segregation itself impacted the way they saw their own residential space. So I came up with an interface diagram, which would look at like the white circles would be the women's exclusive space. The white triangle would be their collective space where they would meet other men and other women. The black circle would be the men's exclusive space, and the black triangle, the men's exclusive gathering space. And a white square would be a common space where both genders could meet. So I was trying to look into, I prepared this interface diagram to see if there was some kind of parallels, or if there was something very odd or unusual about them. So this what I show in the top is of Ludhia, and this is one settlement, this is one space. And in Ludhia, again, it is a Hindu settlement, and what they have are two spaces, the male space and the women's space. And this is the diagram for it, where this common plinth, like suppose you were to visit them, this would be the common area you would get in, and then where both the genders would had access to or could be using it, and then you could kind of bifurcate into two. So that's what this diagram is kind of representing. And when you come to Dordo, and also this is like the male and the female areas, and this is in the Dordo settlement, where you have, this is the arrangement of the entire plinth, and all the houses were, all the units, the bungis are also all arranged in a similar manner, where this would be the male space where my cursor is, and the smaller one would be the women's space. And if I were to look from the front, you would really not be able to see the space behind at all. And so this becomes, so the entire diagram shifts here, though it is in the same climatic zone and craft zone, and or the craft technology to build is the same. The difference here is only because their faith endorses a certain ways of which men and women are seen, and their encounters are tolerated. So you have a very different kind of a spatial system. And again, inside in the Ludhia, you see the kind of access that you have, which all of these spaces do look inwards, and but all of them still have a visible access to the central area. And in the Dordo, there is no way you could actually access that without actually taking permission here and then going in that side. So this is also at a lower level of the plinth. So the entire form of the settlement takes a different meaning altogether. Moving on, I go to the Nayart Tarwad house. This is again sourced out from Wikipedia because I was looking for an old image, because from 1960 onwards with the Land Reform Act, a lot of these Tarwad houses went through a lot of changes. So you don't really see a traditional image very much as it used to be. So this is a matrilineal. The reason why I chose this is because it follows a matrilineal social structure. And the house is essentially a very complex set of elaboration of the Amarasi house, which we see in Indonesia, primarily because in terms of what this space lays out is an elaborate set of rules and regulations as to who will use where and who has access to which space. So when we look at the Nayar Tarwad house, it's important to understand that these are all there's no cluster formation here. They are independent houses, which are Tarwad houses, which sit in the middle of a large set of fields, which this particular family would own. So it is the brother sister pair which has control over the entire land, which though it means so that is where it stops, and that's where the level of equality stops. The woman has control over the land, she has a say in a decision making process, etc., but the entire estate is run by her brother. And here what we see is an elaborate set of rules and regulations here. It looks very simple, but it isn't. There are certain set of distances that are, there are certain kind of social taboos that were enforced. Nayars being slightly higher than the rest of the in the caste hierarchy, there were a set of rules as to who could access this particular place. So based on the caste system, you would actually have 64 steps or 112 steps. So you have to maintain that kind of distance. So what you see is an elaboration of that. So one does see a certain kind of freedom of space of movement around, but that freedom of space is essentially because people from other communities are not allowed here at all. So here I looked into two case studies, and this is Sunil Vamadev's thesis, and I took the base drawings from only, and from there I look into the ground floor of a typical Nayar household. In one of the case studies which I'm showing here, this is the interface diagram that you come up with, where you see the entire ground floor. There are certain areas which, especially these areas, are completely male areas. Women don't really hang around. It's a central space here, which actually some kind of discussions happen, which is a common area. But after that, what happens on this end are completely the women areas. And this particular connecting line that we see is a separate axis that men have, that Brahmin men have. Only Brahmins would use that door to come inside that space, because this common area is this particular square. I don't know, can you all see my cursor? Hello, can you all see my cursor?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, we can see.
Yes,
But
yes.
Rajshri, you'll have to keep speaking into your mic. Into that little.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks.
Also, yeah, so this common area is essentially the dining space, which Brahmins had direct access to. So that is why you have a secondary access also where in a Nayar Tarwad houses. And on the first floor, which you see is a completely different scenario, where it is essentially a female dominated space where women would actually hang around there if they were not actually in the kitchen. And this particular black spot actually indicates that there are the northern staircases. The northern staircases were essentially the male staircases, and the southern ones were used by the women. So you have separate staircases for each of the genders. So if I look at the diagrammatically, I've looked into the male side and the female side, and even in section, that's how it works out. And the first floor would essentially be predominantly women's area, or also a common area where the bedrooms were located. So the men would also have access to it. So these are the different accesses that were there, and the secondary accesses were also always were kept for women, and certain kind of screens were created so that visibility was restricted. Visibility not to the street or etc., but to the workers who worked on the neighboring area. So their visibility, to cut their visibility into the interior spaces, was a screen that used to be added on. So this I talk about the different entrances, how elaborate the male entrances are, because that is essentially seen as a main reception space. And the women's access is usually just a small door, undecorated, rather obscure opening, which is there, which you could really easily miss if you're not too careful. And that was very intentional. That was intentionally done. Moving on, I look at Khasi houses in Meghalaya, which are purely matriarchal, agriculturalists. And when I say matriarchal, this is before 1830s. 1830s is because after 1830s, you have Christianity coming in. Before that, they followed a religion which was what is commonly called as animism, which is essentially means that they believe that they believe in the spirit in nature, and that every stone and tree and land and water are imbibed with spirits. And that's a kind of cultural that's a religion which all tribal, at least most of the tribal communities in India follow. And that's the religion that they also followed until advent of Christianity in around 1830s. And after that, so what I did was I took in Ivan's base drawings of Meghalaya, of his thesis drawings, and then worked on them. So I looked into the traditional Khasi house as well as the new Khasi house. New Khasi houses, the kind of houses that evolved after the 1830s. So the traditional Khasi house, when I say matriarchal, which means that the woman never really leaves her maternal space. So they will build another unit like this, which is right next to the mother's main unit. And so the entire settlement is a set of all the sisters living together in that particular area. So there is no alienation, which one sees in a patriarchal setup. And I'll be discussing that a little later. So the kind, and again, when you come with Christianity, I can imagine the kind of shock the Christian missionaries would have faced, because a kind of religious and social structure where where women actually controlled everything, all walks of life, land, property, the produce, and whatever was the means of production, everything was under the control of theirs, and the women also, the children also stayed with the maternal family side and did not really have to move out at all. And it is the men who moved into the woman's house. So when we look at that setup, what we have is something like very similar to a Tauric tent, where you have a singular space and the hearth, which is in the center, and also, and that would be, and it is always raised because of the humidity, and also to use the lower areas for storage for their stock, that is the sheep and the goats that they would have. And the fireplace was a common place for everyone. Everyone means that's not the men and women of the household, but also the strangers. So they themselves do not have a word for privacy. So everybody was welcome into that space. So you walk into their place, you actually walk into their main space and not into a separate foyer or a vestibule like the Romans had, or the Greeks had. So, but when you come to, so after 1830s, the kind of drawings that you look into, you have a highly segregated set of spaces where the women's quarters are essentially pushed deeper, and that becomes primarily women's area, where the food is cooked and then brought over to the main space for serving. So and one also sees the appearance of a porch on the front, where a stranger, suppose I were to walk in, I would be actually have my encounter here, and then the owner of the house would actually decide whether I can go in or go out, or whether I would be invited in or not. So now the ownership of the house and the certain kind of relationship with the space completely changes. It becomes more rectilinear in shape, and because because the traditional systems have also shifted from the curvilinear shape was also very related to the religious belief that in a curved space was more harmonious with nature and the spirit of the place. Whereas when the faith has changed, the form also changes. It is now very rectilinear. And I made also these diagrams also to see whether what kind of spaces are we actually have. So men would actually gather outside of the space rather than inside or together. And this outside area was essentially a male space. So I was looking into the kind of things that I collated was that one, you had spatial segregation of female spaces, which eventually led on to certain kind of hierarchies in the use. Next is the location and accessibility was also, the deeper the space was, the more patriarchal it would be. Accessibility in terms of where the particular space was placed. Then was the control over the gaze as to who could see these spaces and who could see them, and from the inside, what could they see outside. And also notions of privacy and how they become more and more elaborate as the society becomes patriarchal is something. So I kind of compared all of this together. and also looked into what were the kind of common areas that people. Am I overextending the time? Someone please stop me. I can just stop whenever.
Yeah, Rajashree, maybe 5 more minutes.
Yeah, I'll just wind up real quick.
Okay, thanks.
So then I was looking into public spaces as to how the chopal would be for the men's areas, and also the idea of seating as to who would sit on the chair and who would sit on the floor. And this is a normal, I mean, in the village areas and rural areas, women are very reluctant to sit on a chair. Itself is an act of defiance for them. And how work and leisure becomes integrated, and that when women end up constantly working, whether it is in the city or in the village areas. And this is a typical village chopal, which are spaces of leisure again, where a lot of work that the women do in the household to take care, collect firewood, collect water from miles away, and then they also work in the fields doing hard labor there, which is again not accounted for at all. The time for leisure essentially is always mixed with work. So things don't really change. And I always want to talk about Sampath Pal, who formed in 2006 the Gulabi Gang, and where she talks about domestic violence. And that's the only intent. The intent is to get women who are all isolated in their little homes. They're all migrated from various other places and they have come to a particular village. She works in Bundelkhand, and and where she calls this a sisterhood, where women gather together and form a certain kind of bonding so that they can fight against domestic violence, one, and second, that they don't feel isolated, they are not alone. And this is her work is. And please do watch Gulabi Gang. It's a beautiful documentary by Nishita Jain, an award-winning one too. And when I look in 2016, I have to talk about free to be app. When we come to cities, there's this the free to be app was made by a few young women, and they made maps of Sydney, Delhi, Kampala, Lima, and Madrid. Orange dots say they are unsafe places in the city, and the blue ones talk about safe areas. So they kind of prepared these maps, but this is just 5 cities, and so much more needs to be done. So this is a free to be app, and which was designed by women itself. And this is here in Kalpana Vishwanath comes up with Safety Pin, which is a very important app which she comes up with in Delhi. And this goes one step beyond. It doesn't just mention, this is in 2013, she co-founded this particular venture. And this is not just tracking the movements, not just tracking which are the safe areas and unsafe areas, it also tracks the roads, which are the accessible roads. And it's very interesting to see that most of the roads which are dead end areas, which are dark dead ends, which really don't lead anywhere, where their visibility is poor, the number of people are less who are inhabiting, are all in orange and red zones. There is a harass map in 2010, which was for the first time, sexual harassment was recognized as a crime in Egypt. I mean, that is, it took so many centuries for men and women to acknowledge that this is not allowed, and this is sexual harassment is a crime. And essentially they come up with these maps which again mark out which are the most problematic areas, which has kind of caught on to a lot of cities in Greece and Turkey, but not all cities are covered like this, definitely no. And I must mention Collective Point 6, which is a group of urban designers, planners, and sociologists in Barcelona, and who have come up with various schemes in terms of they hold on that visibility or issues of visibility. They work on ideas of keys on the street and transparency, and it's not just having a brightly lit street, but how many people are on the street and what happens on the street, what kind of signages happen on the street, which will make a particular place safer. So the idea of safety is looked in. Please look into all of these websites that I am mentioning, because they're very, very interesting interventions that they are working on. So in the end, I would like to thank I would like to thank with everyone who had been kind of through their writings, practice and work, who kind of guided and structured my thoughts as well as my design practice. And I want to end with this cover of which I had used for my own dissertation. And this is by Bhagwati Devi. This is the Madhubani painting. And I like this Kali painting primarily because Kali looks so happy here. And so does Shiva there. And the fact that he's being stomped upon, he's not taking an offense to it, perhaps, if I would like to put it that way. And also, as a child, I was always constantly told that Kali hangs her tongue out in shame, but there is no shame here. And it's actually a very colorful, picturesque in which talks about equal representation. Both are in similar colors, both it's a very festive spirit, and there is no shame here. There's no shame in asserting one's own rights, and there is no shame in dissent. So this is one of the reasons I like this, and that's why I'm ending my presentation with this. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks, Vanka. Shall I end? I'll just stop.
Yeah, thanks, Rajashree. Yeah, so
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It was such an interesting and thought-provoking talk. I really appreciate your time. I would now like to introduce our second speaker for the day, Mr. AAKARSH SHAMANUR, sir. He did his bachelor's from RV College of Architecture and MSc in Urban Management and Development from Erasmus University, Rotterdam in the Netherlands. And he's also started an initiative called the hashtag Be Polite that's situated in Bangalore, Chennai, and Kolkata. So through this initiative, he has provided solar-powered lights to street entrepreneurs or street vendors in underserved communities all across the different cities in India. And with the support of patrons, his team and they've been able to reimagine the way India celebrates its festivals in a smoke-free and eco-friendly manner. Welcome, sir. It's a pleasure having you here with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for the lovely introduction, Surbhi. And Rashri, thank you so much for the talk. It was super nice to actually visualize and spatially relate a lot of the topics that I've sort of encountered through the campaign, which I'll eventually share with everyone here. I'm just going to share my screen and I'll run through the presentation. Just a second. Yes, so good evening to everyone. My name is AAKARSH SHAMANUR and I graduated from RV in 2012. So I'm the RV 0780 batch. So 2007 to 2012 is when I was there, for all of you who are the more contemporary students at this point. And how I started with this whole journey was basically I was very interested in like urban design, and the elective I ended up taking was urban design, and then that's where you sort of meet like-minded classmates, and a lot of your principles and values which you've learned over the last 3 to 4 years in architecture sort of overlap, and then you start thinking of, okay, how do you really come up, or how do you really create interventions that are more inclusive? And also another very like the thought, how this entire process started was during our graduation ceremony, we had this guest called Dr. Harish Hande, who he made a statement, and he said a lot of people who are graduating through the CET or through a merit seat where the government is paid for your education, you owe it to like a street vendor who sells pani puri or anybody on the street, because they've all contributed by paying taxes to your education. And that sort of like struck a chord, and that kind of again overlapped with what my granddad had shared with me when I was a kid. So that suddenly was like a aha moment. And especially when I went for my master's to the Netherlands, there was a moment like this whole Swadesh moment that a lot of people say, that you are in a way privileged, but at the same time there is such a huge number of people in India who lack access to basic amenities and infrastructure in our cities. And that's quite evident as you pass through any city in India for that matter. And that's where I said, okay, if, I've done studied urban management for my master's, I have a background in architecture. So how do we really look at creating spatial interventions at the bottom of the pyramid? And how can that really look at how are we, just losing the thought, but how do we really create interventions that can improve the livelihood of the bottom of the pyramid or street vendors in our cities? And I'm just going to run you through the presentation now. And this is an image created by a family friend called Mali, where she just depicted market scene, and interestingly, she calls it the Sitaram market. And a lot of the work is sort of driven by like Mahatma Gandhi's talisman, where he says any decision you make, if it affects or improves the bottom of the pyramid or the last person over there, that is really a good decision. So that's how I interpreted this talisman and then took it forward. And a little context about this initiative was, so every Diwali I would sort of tell people saying, okay, we shouldn't burst crackers because it's quite obvious you're creating pollution, you're creating noise, and a lot of pet owners find it really, it's really sad that pets can't handle the noise. And suddenly, there's a lot of noise, pollution. So I said, okay, how do we really relook at reimagining the way a festival is celebrated in its core essence? Because once I started looking at rolling out this initiative, there were certain people that, you're like trying to change the culture, which has been, passed on by so many years. But if you really look at it, firecrackers really came in at a much more very recent, in the last couple of, let's say 30, 40 years, I guess. So how do we really look at celebrating a festival in its core value? And I sort of overlapped all these items. So cultural values, clean energy, the whole idea of engaging with the bottom of the pyramid, and also how do you get people on board, like citizen engagement? How do you get people in your community to really participate in an activity? And eventually I aligned all of these, I aligned the campaign along with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, where even like gender equality, affordable clean energy, no poverty, reduce inequality, sustainable communities, climate action, in a lot of values, there's a lot of overlapping that happens. So that's when I said, okay, this is a great concept. So really, let's look at how do we take it forward. And I'll tell you how the name came about, the next slide. So Polite was a product which I sort of put together because I had worked in an organization which dealt with communities which dealt with providing sustainable energy to bottom of the pyramid. And there we looked at a solar powered light, and I wanted to be portable because street vendors are usually, they need to pack up their entire store in the evening, or they're always on the move. So Polite was a short form for a portable light, and that eventually became a campaign that said, okay, let's be polite to a street vendor, because the current perception amongst a lot of people about street vendors is that they're a nuisance. They provide very essential services at your doorstep, but at the same time, you don't want to see them in front of at your doorstep. You want them to be somewhere else. So how do we really change that perception to a slightly more positive? One was the underlying intent of the hashtag called Be Polite. So this was the first prototype that I created using the crowdfunding model, where I put out this idea online, and a lot of people who align with the idea of celebrating Diwali in a smoke-free manner contributed to this campaign. And something that sort of added a lot of value as I started with the campaign was, if you look at the image here on the left, this is a location close to Yelahanka railway station, and that is Sabina, who runs a store which just makes snacks and tea, and she's a widow with a daughter, and she is present every day from 10 a.m. till 11:30, 12 in the night. And if you see the image below, that was the earlier situation where she had a small little battery light, and sometimes if that ran out, she would use the torchlight in her phone to sort of keep her business active. And after we gave the light to her, she made a very interesting point. She said, you know, I visited her after a month after handing over the light, and she made a very interesting point that, you know, because now there's brighter light, a lot of women feel safe from the other side of the railway line, because if you just look into the image, that's the railway track over there, and on the other side of the railway track is the Yelahanka NES bus stop, where a lot of people get down, and it's sort of like a major interchange, and they cross over to the other side. So she said that only if I am present, like Sabina said, if I put up my cart and if it's well lit, or even if just by my presence, a lot of women feel safer to cross that path. Otherwise, they have to take like an extra 1 kilometer walk around. So this suddenly sort of created this correlation between lighting and urban safety. So having a street vendor who's well lit and being present at a certain location, it overall adds to the whole idea of feeling a little more safer, because you do have somebody at the street, even if it's late or even if it's dimly lit. Like sometimes the street light would stop working, but the fact that the light in her pushcart would work would just add to that sense of safety. And eventually we sort of made a small little visual catalog as well, along with a cartoonist called Sridhar Komravali. And this was because it was hard to sort of give a technical written manual, because one, we had street vendors who migrated to Bangalore in search of better economic opportunities, and they would probably leave their family behind and then come here early, take the first bus from the village to Bangalore, and then sort of go back in the evening. So, and this would be from Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, and even places from like Hassan and Tumkur within Karnataka. So the audience or the beneficiaries came from different like language. They spoke different languages, and to create a common platform, we said, okay, let's look at a visual manual, and we put across the do's and don'ts in that manual. And as a part of the crowdfunding process, since the money comes for these lights came in from a lot of donors, we had to be accountable and show where all the lights have been given. So once the lights have been handed over to the street vendor, after a certain verification process, which is also crowdsourced in most cases, what we do is we geotag them. So what we do is we just ask the volunteer or anybody from our team or whoever hands over the light to the street vendor to simply just turn on the phone and turn on the location on their phone and pick up the lat long and then update it on our database. So we're able to share the image and also share the exact location of the street vendor with our donors. And in certain cases, if the donors also want to talk to them, we share the contact details based on request, and they can probably go visit and see firsthand for themselves what the impact has been. And so it's been 4 years since we started this campaign. And during the first year, once I started the campaign, there were two reasons why we decided to give the lights only to women street vendors. The first one being, during the pilot project, what I noticed was that the key decisions regarding the business, or how much stock of vegetables to buy, or what particular item to be buy in which season, was made by the lady of the family. And in certain cases, the man or the husband or their son would help in the logistics of bringing those vegetables from the market, or help in like the transport and things like that. So the key decision making and the finances and handling, the entire operation was predominantly women driven. And that's when we said, okay, if that's the case, clearly we should just look for women street vendors. Or if it's a family run cart or a stall, it would be handed over to the women. So they would sort of look after it. And that had a lot of other benefits going forward. And some of them being something as simple as they would use the lights for their children to study. And if they had to cook something, they would use the same light after they go back home. In certain cases, if they lived in a blue sheet community, or if they simply lacked access to formal electricity, they would use these lights. And another very interesting outcome was that, once I visited a street vendor in Jayanagar 9th block, and her name is Manjula Devi, and her son was like, uncle, so when we build a house later on in the future, can we also use solar panels? Because then we don't really need to pay for electricity. So we can generate our own electricity and use it. So suddenly we were talking about how do we look at starting the conversation about sustainability at a very young age and also at the bottom of the social ladder. So today, if they know that, okay, I can use solar power, maybe going forward, once they grow in the economic ladder and in the socio-economic ladder, eventually they would be much more open to you adopting sustainable technologies rather than being skeptical about it. So this was the gist of the campaign, and there was a point where I started looking at, okay, I've done 2 crowdfunding campaigns by myself, and in order to scale up this initiative, I started looking at tying up with university students, and that's where students played a very active role, and we designed a event or an activity where we would form teams of students and we would teach them the skill of crowdfunding and give them this activity of providing a solar powered light to a street vendor by creating groups and giving them a basic target. So we would say, at least we would give them a target of say 5 lights per team, and they would themselves do the crowdfunding. They would raise the funds, they would identify the vendors, and then they would hand it over. And in the process, we would also create a small system where we said that you need to find a person who can service these components as well. So, instead of giving the lights for free, we started taking a small amount from the street vendor as a warranty amount. So anything that goes wrong for a matter of 1 year, it would be replaced or serviced for free. And only after 1 year, they would have to pay for the component or the labor fee for servicing it. So that's how we put together the system. And in the 3rd edition, that's where we had it in Kolkata, and we collaborated with a university called Techno India University, and that's where we sort of really use the students as a tool to reach out to a much larger geographic area, and also like really spread the message of a smoke-free Diwali. And once we realized that, okay, we've catered to lighting as a need, the next need we looked at was refrigeration. And this was at a hackathon at IISc, where it was called this was IISc at the CPDM. And we looked at, the hackathon was called Reimagining Waste. And we looked at providing cold storage solutions to street vendors, where something as simple as a chutney could be freshly kept throughout the evening, because the chutney is usually made in the afternoon, and by the time you consume it, there's already a slight bacteria count that started forming, and the fermentation process sort of takes a toll. And if you're probably having a dosa or any other dish with chutney at like 10:30, 11 at night, there's a very high probability that the bacteria count will be much higher. So we looked at a cold storage solution, and this was done in association with CFOS in Sanjay Nagar and also Waste Impact Trust, where we piloted 4 minibar fridges, and we checked if street vendors would be willing to pay for using these fridges. And this project was called Chill Chutney Cart. I'll share the video link to you after this conversation. And we sort of started off with lighting, and we said refrigeration, and then suddenly we're looking at the overall infrastructure for street vending or the vending zone per se. And this project was done in collaboration with Meta City, which is a firm which some of my classmates run. And also we collaborated with an office called Whitespace 35, and also the Open Office, where they're all basically classmates, and we just got together. We said, okay, let's put this project together, where we looked at creating vending zones under the framework of the Street Vending Act, which has been enacted by the government. And that basically provides a legal entity, not a legal entity, sorry. It provides a certain legality to street vending, and it ensures certain rights and basic access to infrastructure, such as street vending zones to street vendors. And currently, what we're also doing is, with the data that's being captured, we're trying to see, okay, how can we really analyze the data of the street vendors who we're giving the lights to, and trying to eventually build an app that can be used. It is sort of like an Ola or an Uber for street vending. There have been attempts to do this by various organizations across India, but we're trying to look at it from a more holistic sense, where we're looking at trying to tap into the smart city network, and also say that, we can look at an end-to-end solution from push carts to solar lighting, refrigeration, the vending zone, and eventually an app. So technically you could just sit at home and like scan saying, who are all the people selling tomatoes or bendekai in your vicinity of 1 kilometer. So that would show up this data real time. So this is what we've been up to, and I forgot to mention the second reason why we decided to give the lights to women vendors, and that was based on feedback from a lot of our donors. They said that, listen, if you're giving something for free, please don't give it to the man, because they would just sell it and drink something with the money they would get. So if you want to ensure that this campaign is successful and also the product is utilized very well, please give it to the women. So these were the two reasons which sort of overlapped and led to our campaign being more women-centric, women street vendor centric over the years. So it's sort of been like a learning experience. And in fact, since Diwali is coming up very soon, we're going to be launching the campaign in a day or two. And it would be wonderful if you could all like help spread the word, and more importantly, share the idea of celebrating a smoke-free Diwali in your community. So thank you very much. You can please do follow us and support us on all social media platforms, including Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And over to Ananya.
Thank you, sir. It was very informative. With that, we move on to the last speaker for today's session, Ananya Ramesh ma'am. She did her bachelor's from RV College of Architecture. She's currently working at World Resources Institute India, Bangalore, on projects concerning land, governance, urban resilience, and spatial mapping. She has previously worked at CRDF, CEPT University on developing an Indian model of local area planning around transit to achieve the goals of transit-oriented development. Good evening, ma'am. It's nice to have you here.
Hi, Sarati. Thanks so much. It's very awkward to hear ma'am, especially when you're coming back to your alma mater. But yeah, thanks so much. Thank you, Anuradha ma'am, Shweta, Salila ma'am. It was great to hear you, Rajashree. I think you sort of covered up for all the speakers with that sort of very elaborate, highly insightful presentation of looking at gender in the built environment and how it has connections beyond just the space. And AAKARSH, always great to hear you. And I'd like to share, let me, just a minute. Yeah, okay. Is my screen visible?
Yes, it's visible. Yeah.
All right, good. So this is a very specific, very small anecdotal. It's a particular project that I had the chance to work on with a couple of colleagues while I was at IHS. It talks about a township project that has been in the works since the 1990s, and it is still not implemented. And when Anuradha ma'am sort of asked me, saying, looking at gender and placemaking, looking at the urban from the lens of gender, it was a great opportunity to sort of, in retrospect, see what is it that I learned through this project. So again, so this is anecdotal. It's from a particular case, and the idea is to say that when we look at data, when we look at place, when we look at a certain situation, there are multiple ways to sort of slice that data. And what happens when we slice it, let's say, through the lens of gender, and what is it that it offers us in terms of insights in understanding the place, the people, and what is the current situation. So Birdhi Integrated Township was one of the projects by the Regional Development Authority. The idea was to develop knowledge-based townships. It's part of a much larger effort to decongest Bangalore and therefore develop these counter magnets. And Birdhi Integrated Township is it's pretty close to the Birdhi town itself. It's about 30 kilometers and about 9,000 acres of land, primarily 70% of privately owned farmland is placed under something called a land freeze, which is that you cannot change the use of land. And therefore, we wanted to understand that a certain developmental decision that has been made, how does it impact really? So what is the impact on the everyday life condition? What really happens on ground? So the first thing when you say that land is of concern, and especially when you're talking of a farming community, it is the first thing that happens is an impact on the livelihood. And the best way we thought to understand the place would be through focus group discussions, through interviews, to be able to really get a sense of what the place is. So one of the groups that we interacted were the agricultural laborers. And then as soon as we say that, land is now being opened up for development, such as industries to be coming in, what really happens? So when we spoke to the landed class as well as the landless class, and when we spoke to the landless, which is the agricultural labor, and from the women, it was a clear understanding that, sorry?
Sorry, go ahead. There was someone.
Okay, yeah. Okay, no worries. So when we spoke, of course, there were different concerns. So when we spoke to the men, the agricultural laborer, there were the youngsters that were very happy and welcoming the idea of a stable income, to have to move from agriculture to like industry work as wage labor, because they saw it as the opportunity to have stable income. But the precondition that a shift like this comes with, so for example, the industry says that you have to be below 40 years of age with a certain level of skills. Given that these areas are farming communities, they're highly specialized in their skills for agriculture. And when you say that there's an age restriction and also there's a skill requirement, that already sort of, added in a lot of conditions that didn't make the opportunity accessible equally across the demography that we're looking at. And then when we spoke to the women, it was a completely different story. So when we saw with men, it was more of the disaggregation in age that sort of gave us insights on how the opportunity wasn't very equally accessible. With women, it was more so that culturally farming was acceptable within their communities in a sort of the cultural context. But as soon as they said, no, now we'll be going and working in a setup like an industry, like a garment industry, a pickling, packaging, or an automobile industry, that was just not acceptable. And therefore, when we had the chance to engage with them in a conversation, there was quite a strong dissent in terms of saying that although the government says they've provided us with opportunities, it is not something that we are able to access. We're not able to convince our families to allow us to go and work on ground. It's at the scale of a family and as well as the scale of the community, this is not something that is acceptable. So we started seeing, disaggregating it by gender, by age, also by the land holding size. We see that a shift in livelihood, which might not seem as problematic, could also have a very varied impact on ground. Having seen that there are these sort of more detailed or nuanced ways of having to look at this site, the idea was to be able to reach out and talk to more people. And of course, when you're looking at a rural setup, the Anganwadi teacher becomes sort of the face of it, and also a sort of she is the pillar of the community. And the Anganwadi system itself is a completely women-led. It has about a 1.5 million workforce. Unfortunately, it's a mere statistic. These are it's like the faceless statistic. These are women that are pillars of the community. They take care of child development, they take care of young mothers, expecting mothers, nursing mothers. So these are people that are highly trusted, and therefore they act as gatekeepers of community. And they became, so when we visited the different villages that fall under this delineated area, they sort of became our contact points, as well as the people that helped us sort of extended their trust networks with us to be able to gain deeper insights. And therefore the Anganwadi teacher in every community was seen as clearly a gatekeeper, and being able to extend that to us became a very useful resource to be able to engage in conversations that they're not comfortable sharing otherwise. So when we went ahead and spoke to other groups, and we spoke to a group of homemakers, this was an interesting learning for us, because it was that we went in with an assumption, or rather a very strong idea, that when land is at stake and land is sustenance for agricultural communities, this should be something that everybody should have a very strong opinion about. And sort of all of our work we steered our conversations towards understanding of how does it impact the way your family is being able to survive, how has it impacted your livelihood, what is your opinion that the state has had a certain approach to the way in which it's dealt with development and the way it's dealing with land. But when we spoke to the homemakers, they very clearly told us that their concerns were more about health. They said that as and when there's development happening, there's water becoming highly polluted. So we see this with frothing water that's entering their farms. So they spoke of how the men folk in the family are falling sick, the children are falling sick, and therefore the need for health amenities and the fact that there is very poor access, that was sort of a new insight, saying these are the sort of extended impacts of what is really happening. It is not just the land at stake, but there is also the allied problems of pollution, the fundamental resource of water that they're depending on itself at stake. And therefore, the theory with which we went saying land and sustenance and what is really happening with the freeze and a decision that is sort of delayed for over 2 decades. It has had its own life given the political timeline that over the years with the parties changing. But their concerns were a certain way. And this was a great learning for us to see how the bias is inbuilt, like ma'am had said initially, RAJSHREE ma'am, about how we've normalized certain things, that this was something we went in, this was a bias from our side to say that what it is in practice versus what we had thought of it in theory, and how there are within group differences and how people view things differently. While all of this is happening, the state, so the sort of the face of this project for many of us who sort of do internet-based research or sort of read up on newspaper articles, would be that, well, the state, as much as it's opening up land to a lot of big industries, it is also providing skilling programs as sort of a way to help transition from a very primary sector of agriculture to be able to be part of the secondary sector, be industry workers. But having seen how the women had to convince the families to be even able to go for a stitching class, so there's a garment industry that was offering free programs for the women folk there to be able to come and learn, where they even said, we'll pick you up, there will be like a common pickup point, we'll drop you back. They negotiated the timings in such a way that the village elders would be okay with. But eventually when it came to the final decision, it was a complete no, and they couldn't take up these programs. And therefore, what is really presented as something that is highly useful for the community versus what is really the demand and what is the nature of that demand is something that we see a huge a disconnect. And this disconnect needs to be understood from a more to be able to see it from different lenses of people, of age, of gender, of the actual situation of how the people are living on an everyday basis. And to sort of come back to what I started with is the idea of how the idea of land being at stake, and therefore being a farming community dependent on water. This is a reservoir that is in the same area. The building of the reservoir already evicted a large, it resulted in the eviction of a large number of households, which currently have settled on a certain government-owned land. They are not being recognized. But other than that, the water in this reservoir, which is the sort of common resource for people farming in the neighborhood, is highly polluted, as you see it in the image. But we can see that there is a very varied engagement that, or a very sort of perspective that people hold to this resource. So on one hand, there is an entire it's called the Ranganatha Raita Hitarakshana Samiti. So it's like a farmer group which they self-organized themselves when this idea of the land freeze came in, and they said, we need to understand what is the land that is earmarked, how is it going to impact us, and what is it that we are going to sort of have to, what's at stake really, and what is it that's going to be the future of our lives and our families. So they were the people that were very keen on, actually, because they had things at stake, and these are most likely farmers who had not very large land holdings. But there were some other key persons that we spoke to that not only had larger land holdings, but also had political connections that were willing to trade parcels here and to be able to reinvest land later. So even within the farmer communities, depending on what their position is, what their land holding is, what their economic capacity is, they dealt with it differently. Then there were some farmers who clearly made a shift from food crops to commercial to cash crops. So they've moved into sugarcane farming, which is not really highly dependent on water. And therefore we see even a change in cropping pattern. And that is primarily because of issues like having to not work, because working in the farm with polluted water led to a lot of health hazards. And of course, we heard from the women that how families have been falling sick. There are no accessible health amenities. And therefore, and another case was where in desperate situations, there have been distress sales of land, saying we're already dealing with polluted water. There aren't sufficient subsidy programs that are extended by the state, plus the current situation of land. We heard multiple cases where there have been distress sales where the land has been sold off, not even closest to the market value, to be able to secure themselves with whatever money that they make at that point in time. So we see that even a common resource, which we assume that would hold a certain value and how people would engage with it given a certain development decision that has been made, is also highly different. And therefore, for me, this was an opportunity to go back and sort of revisit this to see how, if we use different lenses to look at the data, what is it that we can really what sort of insights can it provide such that we're able to provide meaningful recommendations of how to change the situation. So yes, that's my little bit to the contribution, little contribution to the conversation. And yes, thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. That was extremely interesting and very thought-provoking. I now kindly request Salila ma'am to take over.
Okay. Thanks, Surabhi. I think in the interest of time, I'm not going to do a whole lot of summarizing. All I want to say is the three talks were amazing and much, much more than we could have hoped for. And so Rajashree very beautifully through that presentation of hers brought out, highlighted how binaries and gender stereotypes have been shaping our public and private realm from time immemorial. At one point, you very poignantly said that nothing seems to have changed a whole lot. But then at the same time, you end your presentation on a fairly positive note, where you brought out or highlighted several examples where efforts are being made by ground up and maybe some top down as well to kind of create safe spaces or more accessible spaces for women in the city by themselves or by other actors. So I thought that was a very well-rounded and fascinating presentation. Thanks for that. AAKARSH, through your presentation, you highlighted, I thought it was fabulous how you talked about, through your own ventures, you talked about, again, it's a kind of continuing what Rajashree said about access and safe spaces for women in public spaces. And you've kind of shown a couple of examples through which that can be achieved and how you bring in crowdsourcing and you involve other actors of society as well in the process, increasing awareness. So in society, and I think that was nice. And you also talked about tying up with the Smart Cities project. So how do you then create a platform where government and citizens get together and work together to come up with some proactive and good solutions? And in Ananya's presentation, I was struck by the point that you made about well-intended government programs, you know, and that they never seem to really, they're very well-intended. Obviously, they want to upgrade the skills of these women and make them independent. But then, I don't know, lack of adequate research or whatever it is, it never really works, right? A lot of times these societal norms and pressures kind of keep the recipients from actually being able to access those. So I was going to ask a couple of questions, but I think I'd rather open up the floor to our audience and just state your name and ask your question. You could just do that. Anyone? Otherwise, I'll have to hijack the whole thing, and that won't be very democratic.
While everybody is, while everybody is coming up with questions or whatever, I would like to thank both of my co-presenters here, Ananya and Akash. I think next time I'll add "be polite" in my slide because it's such an interesting venture, because maybe perhaps people think it's small, but these small interventions make such a huge difference to an entire family. And there was a very interesting talk I had listened to, I think in the beginning of this lockdown, and where they looked at Sabarmati riverfront project, and there is a you all would know much more about it than I do. You all are urbanists, so this is your. I'm moving into your territory. There is a Sunday Ravivari in Ahmedabad, and that was completely removed, and almost 3,600 vendors lost their place and opportunity to sell their ware in that particular area. And how it affects, like the documentary done in NID was on one family, one vendor, the number of other families that one vendor supports. And by removing one vendor out from that picture, how many other families are affected by it. And that was very nice. And Ananya, you're absolutely spot on, you know, because I think we do a lot of research work and we do so much of theory and so many research papers are there, but somehow they always languish in libraries, and the officials who are actually formulating these development plans and land freeze ideas, etc., don't seem to have that connect. And when I talk about invisible women, Ananya, I also think we also consider the agriculture is also invisible. We're not really considering. We are looking at that piece of land on that map, which is so unfortunate. Come on.
You can also look at a group called Blank Noise. They talk about eve teasing in urban cities, run by a lady called Jasmine Pateja. She's an artist based out of Srishti. So you can also look at that. It's called Blank Noise. It's been operating for the last 10 years now.
Yeah,
based out of Bangalore, right?
Yeah, she's based out of Bangalore. She's attached to Srishti for some time.
Okay, guys, questions?
Otherwise, we'll keep chatting.
Okay.
I think maybe people can try and use the group chat if you want to type it out.
Yeah, you could type.
Probably type it out. Yeah.
Ananya, I really like your Anganwadi comment, because they are the backbones for COVID as well right now.
Yes.
Correct.
They are the ones.
It's very overwhelming to see the amount of work that they put in, and it's almost selfless. Like, I think they do it out of their care for the community than anything else. And although the political representatives are the key decision makers, the kind of respect these women have, and it was very heartening to see, at least in the villages that we had.
I met two of them. One belonging to Ganigarpalya, next to just before Turhali Forest, and one part of this one, our place where we stay, Tikegodanpalya. They are part of the government college over, government school over there.
Right.
Pre-primary school. It's amazing talking to them. I enjoy my bus journeys, BMTC bus journeys. It keeps me grounded, as I keep telling.
So, I just had one question though. So, we're talking about this, starting with Rajashree's presentation, we're talking about the city being shaped by men and for men is what comes through, right? And at the same time, in more contemporary times, the public realm also has changed, as in, we talk from historically, women's role was more in the household and inside the house, but the more women stepping out, more and more women stepping out and occupying the public realm. So do you see any kind of, this is for all three of you, I mean, you already addressed this to some extent in your presentations, and that's what your presentations were about, but where do you see the spaces for women in the cities today? I mean, and when you say for women and by women, how could it happen then? Other than them appropriating spaces, which is what we always talk about, blank noise, or we're talking about Gulabi gang. It's always, there's this confrontational element to it, or slightly, it's something that you need to take by force, even though it's your right. But have you seen other spaces emerge? Or
Essentially, I have what I feel right now is two things. There are certain kind of state interventions. State interventions in the sense, like, for instance, in Kerala, I don't know whether it happens in other places. In Kerala, we have seen the pink taxis, that's a she taxi, and now they have, I just read yesterday about the she bus also, and which is actually the first time I think the state is actually acknowledging, no, the streets are not safe. Streets are not safe, and that they have put up these pink patrol cars, which are they zip around, so they give you some kind of a place. In case there's some kind of a molestation or a harassment, you can quickly respond to them. That is one, but which actually means that women can now women can actually step out. There is another thing this Kerala state is doing, is also coming up with domestic violence or violence shelters. That means if there is I'm affected by a domestic violence incident at home, I and my child can move out into it. So it's been very applauded, and a lot of happiness about the whole kind of a venture is all seen. But I don't understand, the problem here is that why should the woman go out? She didn't beat up. Or why does a person who has been affected by domestic violence move out of her safe home? It is the person who perpetrator who has to be moved into a detention center. And so there is a certain kind of attitude which also needs to change. And this is what I always feel, that men and women both need to really question as to who the space belongs to and why are these social constructs there. And they have to question that, these social constructs, and how you need to change it. And that change has to happen. There are innumerable women who endorse patriarchal norms because they are conditioned and structured to do that. So there are innumerable people, like Otsoli, I think 2016, they came up with the new rule that said that women can now work beyond 7 o'clock. That means till 2016, women were actually, from the legislation came in 1960s, that legislation that women were allowed to work outside their homes only till 7 p.m., which meant that they were anyway out of the work then. A lot of people won't employ shops in shops, because after 7 p.m. anyway, they have to get a guy to take her place. Might as well employ a guy to man the shop, as they call it.
Yeah.
So those kind of, so one is appropriation. I feel appropriation is necessary because the more visible, like what Collective Point 6 also say, the more women are there outside, it makes a place safe, and then you want to use that place. Otherwise, I would avoid, because I don't feel comfortable. So I think appropriation is one issue. I think it's very essential. Second, I feel is that how safe is the home is a very big question, which we make assume, like a lot of things we assume. We also assume the home is a safe place, but it isn't. It really
definitely
isn't. It's a very violent area. So I think appropriation is one of the first steps that we need to take currently. It does sound very confrontational, but it's high time, no?
I guess so confrontational is also fine, but it is, why does one have to fight for what one's right? I guess birthright is the question too, right? I mean, one always fights for their rights, but then not everyone has to, right?
I also, it's actually very sad, like all these martial arts classes, and that we have to teach our children to hit back. when maybe they don't want to hit back.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't want to hit back. Maybe they're not violent. We're actually teaching our children to be violent. And so there's we have to kind of have a civic sensibility where we talk about, other than math, science, and all those things that we do in school, we have to talk about respecting each other, understanding consent, and asking a question. These are things we never do. We don't even have a gender discussion in schools.
Yeah,
So
that was,
that itself,
integrating it into the education system definitely is one important step, I guess. AAKARSH?
Yeah, Salila ma'am, we have 2 questions on the
Yeah, I thought they were going to
chat box.
respond.
Yeah.
Yes, they didn't respond to this
sorry.
question.
Okay. Okay.
Namrata and then Anvisha. Yeah, I saw them. AAKARSH, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just quickly start off.
Ananya? We could just move on to the next questions otherwise. Should we do that? Namrata, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, ma'am. This question mainly is to Rajshri ma'am, and the question was like there are more than 2 genders, right? So why has it been male and female, and like there must have been some cultures who saw it as a spectrum, and why don't we see more of their architecture?
Their architecture, essentially most of the egalitarian communities that I have read about are very much earlier in time, where it's also connected with modes of production and who controls what, and what is valued. Today, if I have value for something, suppose I value housekeeping, or I have value for housework, then I see it differently. Whereas certain so the shift in modes of production essentially has played one of the reasons where you have very hierarchical gender binaries that you see, like where these associations are there, and played such a role. Why has played such a role historically? Yes, of course, it has played a huge role, because what do we architects do? We actually translate or make or build up what we actually are seeing across. So if there is a certain social structure, this is my understanding, social structure which is prevalent, or the certain kind of belief system which are prevalent, the architecture eventually shapes that or gives a 3-dimensional form to that. And this is what I gathered from the kind of very rudimentary research work that I had done at an undergraduate level, because this happens. So the minute you change, so for instance, the city design, if I were to take up Akash's idea of looking at the Be Polite movement, where we look at the vendors as very important people in the social fabric, then I will make space for them. I will not ask them to evacuate. I will not not negate them from the whole design process. So that is how we need to, why I always say small interventions are very important. They play a huge role, because they slowly restructure our way of thinking, which is very, very important. And if we think differently, we design differently. If I tell, Salila, Vanka ma'am was saying that we are looking at the male space. Actually, it is not purely male. City is not just for male. It is for an able-bodied male. Can a disabled male person actually use the city as well as anybody else can? Definitely no. It's always for an able-bodied young male person that the cities are designed for. So if you start thinking that no, the elderly are important, if you start thinking that no, the pregnant woman is important, it is important for the vendors to have an income or generate an income, then you will design the city completely around that. So it's where you're looking. If you're looking at the right place, then things fall well. Anybody else, please? Yes, nice podcast. Yeah, 99% Invisible is a wonderful podcast. Yeah, I've listened to that.
Anvisha has a question. Anvisha, are you around?
Yes. So my question was, to what extent can design help in removing these gender stereotypes from our society, as there are so many layers to these problems?
I would like to just add a point, or at least start off the answer. One of the things I've noticed is that along with design, sensitization is very important, because if you just place a design of a product or either a building or anything, like if the design is manifested into this world and you place it, then sensitization plays a very important role in the entire process, because that has to be conveyed to the end user or like to the society. Because if you don't sensitize them, then it's really difficult to sort of get the idea across, or at least talk about how you want to implement the idea. I mean, just one example is I attended a fellowship in Madhya Pradesh with an organization called Development Alternatives in Orcha. For all those who've seen the movie Bajirao Mastani, I mean, the place where Deepika Padukone is from is this historical place called Orcha. And there, the first exercise that we were made to do, we were all blindfolded and all our shoe laces were tied to each other. And they said, go across the room now. So sensitization before you start any design process or any project, of understanding the end users is very important. You need to be immersed or really understand their user behavior and then sort of start. So I think since I'm assuming you are studying at this point, so immersing yourself and really getting to know the user group is very important, because there were a lot of experiences at college from which, like, even Ananya and we made like a video about Gandhi Bazaar in college. So there were already small projects that we did where we were immersed right into the context, and that's where we were sensitized to these needs. So in that context, I really feel that, let's say, a topic about gender sensitization, like probably the guys need to be sensitized about certain issues, or the girls need to be they need to be exposed to certain aspects. And I feel that part of sensitization is something that can lead to some good outcomes.
Would you like to add to that?
I do agree.
Yeah.
No, I'm agreeing to what Ashwin has mentioned here. And second is, there's another question on the color pink. Why I would like to take that question is, Ananya, and I just did a talk on gender and color with NID students just a week ago. And so this whole thing, and I talked about the color pink. So her question is, why does it have to be the color pink depicting something belonging? It's actually something which is a Western import, is what I would say. That traditionally, India, we don't associate pink with a gender. For one thing, we don't associate that at all. We associate color with seasons, with moods, with a certain character of a person. For instance, somebody is very dark or evil, or it can be dark, but at the same time, Sri Rama, who's of a dark skin, can also be dark. So we don't have certain kind of color schemes for gender, essentially. So what we see is pink here today, and the whole thing, pink cars and pink buses for women, etc., is a totally new import that we have imported from the Western world. We don't have any gender, but this is there right now. But it's very sad, because essentially we look at colors very differently. But it's a marketing strategy that women should wear pink, and which also started only from around 1940s onwards, just around after the world wars, not before. Am I answering the question well enough?
Shruti, that was your question. Do you have any further questions on that?
No, thank you. I understood.
I would just like to add to Shruti's like the color pink aspect. I mean, culturally, if you really look at a lot of communities across India, or a lot of like subcultures, and you don't really have that idea of, okay, a pink or a blue, or as Rajshri clearly mentioned, I mean, culturally we're rich of colors, and you either associate that with festivals or you associate with the season. And again, it eventually comes back to the seasonal aspect, because festivals are again seasonal. So you're eventually relating all the colors to various elements. So as she said, I mean, eventually you want a certain color because you want to segregate certain things. So like how you have, like, let's say blue basket for this, green basket for that. So it's a certain structure that people would like to have. So you say, okay, this color is this color is that. So it's a part of like the whole industrial revolution where you sort of said, okay, people doing this process, you wear this, and people engaged in this kind of a process wear that, and that eventually probably the idea of structuring and having a certain control over the process is what leads to color designations per se. So, I mean, that's something that I just want to add.
Yeah, that's just today. So we have sociology in our 5th semester, and some of the students are here today. And so the thing about dehumanizing people by making them data, you know, so I guess it's kind of categories. When you start creating categories, that's what happens. And yeah.
Sure.
Kirtana has a question. Kirtana, are you around?
Yes. I listened to RAJSHREE ma'am's talk, and I have a question for her. In non-urban areas, could architecture be effective in disbanding gender-based violences?
Gender-based violence, it can be effective, yes, but it also requires, like Akash and Ananya were talking earlier, it also requires sensitization. It doesn't work just one way, because we are so preconceived, the ideas that we have been hammered in, like a whole lot of women and men believe that their position in society is reinforced and it is the right way of living. For instance, even if you look at the nationalist movement, that's what I was talking about, and I've been reading extensively now, and they constantly keep on reinforcing that the home is a traditional place and where we don't mess up. For instance, we have tried to abolish sati. I'm using the word try to abolish. Legally, we have tried to.
Yeah.
And you still have so many protest marches saying that, no, let us revive sati. What are they thinking is what we will sit here thinking in the village, sitting in the city here. I sit in one day. What are they thinking? But they are made to believe that that is connected. It is necessary. Women are inferior and men are superior, and there is no lesser value. At the same time, so men and women both have certain kind of unlearning to do. That no, this is not right. This is not a balanced equation, and this imbalance needs to be tackled, so that men have to realize that they are not some superior beings from above with entitlement, and women need to also realize that they need to ask questions about all these imagery, the kind of advertisement that we kind of facing, the kind of stories that we hear about, all need to be questioned, and they need to step up also. So there's some stepping down and somebody stepping up, and that's the only way we can fix something. And in non-urban areas, architecture would be effective, definitely. If there were places, like there was domestic violence, like Sampath Pal, when she talks about, if a woman is getting beaten up there, what is she supposed to do? Simple. What is she supposed to do? Her question there in the non-rural areas or in the urban city, the same question applies here. What is she supposed to do? Nobody will help because it's a domestic issue. So no one will come to help. So she's fending on her own. She is isolated from her family members who may have supported her, or friends, etc., who may have supported her. So what is she supposed to do? So the unlearning that requires, it's not just non-urban areas, it's also here. And could architecture be effective? Definitely, definitely it was. To make people visible, to give women an option that they can step out, to first of all deconstruct this institution of marriage itself. Why should people stay together? It's a defunct institution. It works only for men. So one needs to kind of redefine the kind of relationships. I talked about heterosexual family. Why can't we think of family? Like in our textbooks, you should look at the school textbooks, at the first standard, second standard. You see family, there's a man and there's a woman. The man has a suitcase. The woman is dressed very traditionally. It's still the same bloody picture. I mean, get a life, man. I mean, like step out and see who are the ones who are printing these textbooks. So there are certain things that have to be changed. So architecture is effective in terms of the kind of spaces we make. Do we make certain areas, if I were to redesign a certain area within a semi-rural fabric, can I come up with areas for women to hang around with? A chopal for women, for instance. Who does that? Why should they always hang around only in places of work, like they're collecting water or for a temple? Like, for instance, we go to the temple, we can sit day and night in the temple. Nobody will ask because we are praying for the family. It is for the larger good of the family. But I go out for a film, that will be a big issue. But that is for my own entertainment, which is not acceptable. Why should it be like that? So there are certain things that we can do. Definitely as architects we can do, but first we have to be aware of it. If I'm not aware of it, I won't even think of a project like that.
Talking about violence, yeah, Ananya, go on.
Just want to add my 2 cents to this, but I think also through architecture school, there was this thing that a lot can be resolved with design. And although I'm not saying this very assertively, but I do have my apprehensions about this thing of what design can really do. I think design, whether it is at the level of a product like what AAKARSH is doing, or the kind of spaces that ma'am spoke of, or like larger development decisions at the scale of an entire region that I was trying to understand. I think these are just tools, but the practice of it really, really lies with a lot of other stakeholders and the process. And like people say, something cannot be inclusive, like a product, the final outcome, unless the process is inclusive. And so similarly, I think that the practice of it, whether it is sensitization or whatever, it's not the tool, but the practice of it. So you can design a house a certain way, but it's up to them how they use it. Like there are some limitations of how much one can do with design. So as an, not as a sort of assertive answer to say yes or no, but just to be wary of the fact that there is so much that one can do, and there is so much that is the practice of how that is used and how that is actually being sort of processed by the ones that are actually at the other end of the spectrum, like the user end of it. So just to area of the tool and the practice is just what I wanted to say.
Absolutely. Like, so when she's talking about gender-based violence within the household, how can an architect help beyond a certain point? It's very difficult. A certain kind of sensitization, as AAKARSH was mentioning, is what is the most effective here.
Yeah.
And other than that, even when you look at maps, which I found that I mentioned maps in my presentation primarily because I was wondering, the first planning school happened in Delhi in 41 or something. It was the first planning school that was opened up. And it is 2010. Look at the gap. It is taken for someone to come up with a map which identifies which are the places safe or unsafe, which is ridiculous. What were we doing all this while? And why wasn't it important in 41? I mean, this was not that 41 was a very peaceful time and nobody got beaten up. Definitely they got. And I was wondering what would be the map for the transgender? What spaces are accessible to them? I mean, they are not even there in the equation so far in the whole planning department. And I don't even see any kind of exploration, even at the educational level, architectural or planning educational level. It'd be nice actually, all the so many planning schools all over the country, and all of them come up with just a map of which map out violence in that particular city where their planning school is. Itself would be such a huge useful data bank for the authorities to work on, and also to generate an awareness among people, men and women.
And I just talked about violence. Okay, sorry, AAKARSH. I just wanted to add that we always talk about physical violence, but there's a lot of non-physical emotional violence also that happens in the private realm. And that's in turn kind of tied up with, I guess, dependencies, and that have been, again, created by certain, the more domineering partner, right? And this goes to, I was just going to ask Ananya something, AAKARSH, but then please go ahead and she can answer that. So Ananya, my question was, I was thinking about, I recently read that a lot of women work in the agricultural sector, but very few actually own land. Okay, so and that's also right. So you are dependent in one sense. You are doing all the work, but you have no claim to the land that you're working. So did you come across that component when you were working with that community was my question. Sorry, Akarsh.
Sad answer is,
yeah.
Akarsh, do you want to first complete what you were saying? Or?
No, you can complete and then I'll add to both your points.
Okay. Unfortunately, in all of the, I don't know whether fortunately or unfortunately, but the land was not owned by women. In pretty much most of the conversations that we had. And it was either that they're tilling their own land, so either they assist the father-in-law, husband, brothers, or they're tilling someone else's land, so they're just agricultural laborers. So that was the extent to which sort of their engagement was. And as I said, that when they're not sort of actively farming or involved in agriculture related labor, then it's the kind of engagement with development was very different. And therefore, like, even just connecting this thing with the violence as what I see as violence may not be perceived by violence as somebody else. So as an example, the domestic help that we have at home had certain issues, and so she was constantly coming back to me saying, "Higi Gaito, this is what has happened." And even if not even with the tone of a suggestion, but sort of as a discussion, you say, these are ways that we could approach this issue without even saying, you need to do this. They are bound by them saying, just a day after, they will come back by saying, "Arey, this is something that happens every day." And therefore, something that we feel needs to be very proactively addressed is that they are bound by very other either societal obligation, some sort of cultural connotations of what is appropriate and what is not. And therefore, it's very hard to sit in this seat and say, this is something that needs to be dealt with. As in, I'm constantly struggling, even when we did this whole land conversation, and I think that was the biggest takeaway for me, that there is just such differentiated impacts. Like the impact is so varied that whether it's with land ownership, so even if they have land ownership, a lot of times there is the land records is another big sort of struggle in our country. So you can't even establish relatively with agricultural lands, it's clear with our revenue records. But then again, a lot of what happens in rural is that the settlement areas have problems. So if you look at things like urban villages, settlement areas are a big problem. So even without going into who really owns the land ownership, being able to establish that itself is a challenge. So yeah, so definitely we didn't see women owning the land. We only saw them as people that were affected by a change in status of the land, with definitely not as much ability to take decisions. Or I don't know if it was the particular region, it was a particular caste, it was largely the farming community that we were in that particular region. So again, this would be very anecdotal. I would not be able to tell you broadly what is the trend, but this is from that particular case.
Thanks, Ananya. Akash?
Thank you.
So just taking the conversation forward, especially within the agricultural sector, and also mostly from the non-urban areas or rural context. So at least from my experience in Orcha, we were dealing with a farmer-producer organization, which is again women-led. And there, one of the key things that we noticed was there are 50 members. This was set up with the help of an NGO, and NABARD was sort of pushing for establishing farmer-producer organizations. So that's sort of been like a trend over the last 10 years, where they're trying to really address certain issues by creating these farmer-producer organizations. But one of the things I noticed was initially there was complete lack of like accountability or ownership, and even something as simple as having an identity, because here is a farmer producer organization that's being set up, and the board of directors are 10 women, and 40 other women are a part of the FPO, but they were just merely signatures or like just rubber stamps. Like they just had to attend a meeting once every month and say that, okay, we are here, and they would be served samosas and tea, and that they were happy with that. They're like, it's like a monthly outing. But that was the whole issue, because here is a well-intended scheme by the government, but due to the on-ground situation, they were just like, listen, we can't do anything. So our intention in a period of like a good 2 months was basically to address the core issue of accountability and providing an identity. So here is Bundelkhand, where everyone wears a gungat and what the idea we had was, I was a part of another a group of 3 other people from different parts of India, and the idea we had was, okay, let's make ID cards. We just take pictures of these women and provide them an ID card that says that they are a part of this FPO, and that would, to an extent at least, help in ensuring the accountability and also improve their self-confidence within their rural society. Because initially when we were dealing with this project, all like when they would come to these meetings, other people in the village would be like, why are you wasting your time and going for these meetings? But the day we clicked photographs and made these ID cards and handed over these ID cards, the level of confidence with amongst these women was something else. Because I noticed one man who was, when they were coming to get these photos clicked, he was like, "Arey, kya karne wale ho? Kya bada kaam karne wale ho?" types of a comment. And these 4 women they just ignored him and they went back. And that same afternoon when they came back, then they're like, "Dekho, ID card banaya, we're running a company." So that feeling or that sense of pride was something that was at least one step higher. But going back to again looking at the context in the rural areas, I think these small steps really need to be addressed. And coming back to the question by Kirtana, architecture needs to plug into a couple of other larger ecosystem, and that's when it really makes sense. So small systemic changes will definitely help, but know for a fact that the academic upbringing that you are having at RV right now will enable you to think systemically, to look at non-architectural interventions that will be that will have an underlying principle of your architectural thought process. So not everything needs to be architecture, but it's a thought process that you learn at college that you can apply in different interventions. So just keep that aspect in mind.
Thank you, Akarsh, for summing that up. That was the line that I was looking for.
That's also sorry for ending it.
No. That was actually the principal thought behind this. It's not always, the direct references that one makes from architecture, but it's also what, is underlying. So that's exactly what you highlighted. So I'm just really happy that you reiterated that.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think we are running we've run out of time. And if there are any more burning questions, or can I request Surabhi to do the honors of thanking and saying goodbye?
Yeah, so I guess this brings us to the end of yet another exciting session of Crossroads of ConveRVsations. I would like to take this opportunity to thank our speakers, RAJSHREE ma'am, AAKARSH sir, and Ananya ma'am, the RSS Trust, our principal, O.P. Bhavne, our dean, Professor Suresh Murthy, faculty coordinators, Anuradha ma'am, Salila ma'am, and Shweta ma'am, and us student coordinators, and also the audience for taking time and being here with us today. Thank you so much. And also please stay tuned for more updates on the upcoming sessions. Thank you.
My thanks to all of you. My thanks to all the three.
Thank you so much.
Thanks to the rain gods in Kerala, Rajashree.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you very much. Hope to have more conversations in the future. Okay. Okay then.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
At the campus.
On campus, definitely. Yes.
Thanks, Shweta. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Good night.
Bye.
Good night.